Deep in the quiet, rolling hills of Pictou County, Nova Scotia, there's a silence that feels heavier than the morning mist. It is a kind of rural landscape where everyone knows their neighbor's name, their truck, and their business. But on the morning of May 2nd, 2025, that silence was shattered by a phone call that would trigger one of the most agonizing mysteries in Canadian history. At 10:01 a.m., a voice crackled over the emergency line, breathless and panicked. It was Malia Brooksmurray, reporting that her two young children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, had simply vanished into the woods of Lansdowne Station. Imagine, for a moment, the chilling reality of that scene. Two toddlers, barely old enough to tie their own shoes, wandering out into a vast, unforgiving wilderness of dense brush, swamps, and hidden ravines while their parents slept. The story told to the dispatchers was simple, yet haunting. The mother and her partner, Daniel Martell, had been dozing in bed, a brief moment of rest in a busy household. And when they woke up, the door was open and the children were gone. From that single moment of realization, a nightmare began that has stretched across months, turning into a saga of search warrants, polygraph tests, and most recently, a shocking arrest that has turned the entire investigation on its head. This is not just a story of missing children. It is a complex web of family dynamics, legal battles, and the recent dark revelations surrounding the man who was supposed to be their protector. As we look at the latest updates from January 2026, the arrest of Daniel Martell on violent charges unrelated to the disappearance has reignited a firestorm of questions. Was the wandering away story ever the truth? Or was there something far more sinister lurking behind the closed doors of that rural home? Today, we are breaking down every single detail, from the first footprint in the mud to the handcuffs clicking shut around Martell's wrists just days ago. The immediate aftermath of that 911 call was a frantic, desperate scramble. Within hours, the rural quiet of Lansdowne Station was replaced by the thrum of helicopters and the bark of search dogs. Neighbors joined hands with first responders, trekking through the thick undergrowth, calling out names that would soon be known across the country: Lilly and Jack. The initial hope was that they had simply found a cool place to hide or followed a butterfly too far into the trees. But as the first night fell and the temperatures dropped, that hope began to turn into a cold, sharp fear. The terrain in Pictou County is deceptive. It looks beautiful from the road, but once you are in the thick of it, the canopy swallows the light, and the ground becomes a labyrinth of mud and thorns. By the second day, the search had ballooned into a massive operation. Hundreds of volunteers, search and rescue teams from across the province, and specialized RCMP units descended on the area. They weren't just looking for children anymore. They were looking for any sign of life. A shoe, a scrap of fabric, a broken branch. The community held its breath, waiting for the news that they had been found safe. But as the hours turned into days, the narrative began to shift. Why had it taken until 10 a.m. to notice they were gone? How could two children, so young, travel so far that they couldn't be found within the first sweep? These were the questions whispered at the edge of the search perimeter, the questions that would eventually lead the RCMP to look inward at the very people who had made the call. It was a race against time, a battle against the elements, and the beginning of a mystery that will remain unsolved for nearly a year, only to be punctuated by the recent violent allegations against Daniel Martell that have left the public demanding justice. The investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan was never just about searching the woods. It was about peering into the lives of those they left behind. When the RCMP first arrived at the home in Lansdowne Station, they were met with a scene of domestic normalcy disrupted by chaos. Malia Brooksmurray and Daniel Martell were the primary focuses of the initial inquiry, as a standard in any case involving missing minors. The story they provided, that the children wandered off while the adults were sleeping, was one that the police had to take at face value while simultaneously preparing for the worst-case scenario. However, as the days wore on without a single confirmed sighting of the children, the pressure on the family intensified. The public's eye turned sharply toward Daniel Martell. Who was he? What was his relationship with the children? As a stepfather figure, he was in a position of trust. Yet as investigators began to dig into background of the household, they found a history that was far from the idyllic rural life portrayed on the surface. We now know, through unsealed court documents released in early 2026, that the relationship between Malia and Daniel was fraught with tension. Allegations of physical abuse began to surface, stories of Martell blocking her or holding her down. While these details were kept from the public during the height of the search in 2025, they were the silent undercurrents that guided the RCMP's Major Crime Unit. Despite this, the police were careful. They publicly stated multiple times that the case was not being treated as criminal in nature. This phrase, "not criminal," became a point of contention for a public that couldn't understand how two toddlers could vanish into thin air without someone being responsible. But as we pivot to the present day, January 2026, the landscape of this case has shifted violently. The arrest of Daniel Martell has sent shockwaves through Nova Scotia, not because he was charged with the children's disappearance, but because of the nature of the crimes he is now accused of. On January 26, 2026, the RCMP moved in on Martell in Lansdowne, taking him into custody on charges of sexual assault, and forcible confinement. These are heavy, dark charges involving an adult complainant, and the timeline is what truly chills the blood. These alleged crimes occur between September 2024 and March 2025, the exact window of time leading up to the day Lilly and Jack went missing. This revelation changes the entire context of the home environment in those months before May. If Martell was capable of the violence alleged in these new charges, what does that mean for the safety of the children in that house? The RCMP has been quick to say that these charges are unrelated to the missing persons file, a standard legal distinction. But for the community and the followers of True Crime Radar, the connection feels impossible to ignore. We are looking at a man who is now legally accused of violent, predatory behavior occurring in the very same home from which two children vanished. The wandering away theory, which once seemed like a tragic accident, is now being viewed through a much darker lens. As we continue to peel back the layers of this investigation, we have to ask, was the search in the woods a search for the victims of an accident, or was it a search for the victims of a domestic environment that had become a powder keg? As the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan entered its second week in May 2025, the optimism that usually fuels these operations began to wane, replaced by a grim, methodical determination. The RCMP and various search and rescue teams had covered hundreds of square kilometers, but the results were hauntingly sparse. Then came the first piece of evidence, a pink blanket. It wasn't found on the ground, tucked into a hollow log, or discarded in a field. It was found snagged in a tree, roughly 1 kilometer away from the Sullivan home. This blanket, confirmed to belong to 6-year-old Lilly, became the centerpiece of the investigation for weeks. How did it get there? Did a small child, struggling through the dense Nova Scotia brush, lose it as she ran? Or was it placed there? The height of the blanket and the branches and its distance from the house suggested a journey that seemed almost too difficult for a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old to make alone, especially through terrain that seasoned searchers found challenging. Shortly after, a single child-sized boot print was discovered in the mud, along with a small tricycle located near the property line. Yet, in a move that baffled the public, the RCMP later downplayed these findings, stating they held no relevance to the current search area or had been ruled out as recent signs of the children. This disconnect created a vacuum of information, and in that vacuum, suspicion began to grow like a weed. People began to wonder if the physical evidence was being used to lead the searchers away from the truth rather than toward it. The psychological weight of the search was not just felt by the investigators, but by the entire town of New Glasgow and the surrounding Pictou County. This was a community that had seen its fair share of hardships, but the idea of 2 children being swallowed by the earth was a different kind of pain. Candlelight vigils were held, and yellow ribbons were tied to every fence post and mailbox. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the RCMP was shifting its focus from the woods to the digital and psychological realm. They began the mammoth task of reviewing over 8,000 video files, everything from private doorbell cameras to highway surveillance and business security footage. They were looking for a car, a person, a movement, anything that contradicted the timeline provided by Malia Brooks Murray and Daniel Martell. At the same time, the parents were brought in for questioning. In a high-stakes move, both Malia and Daniel, as well as the children's biological father, Cody Sullivan, agreed to take polygraph tests. The results were a turning point that seemingly cleared the path for the accidental theory. All three passed. The RCMP announced that the parents were being cooperative and that the lie detector tests indicated they were being truthful about their lack of involvement in the disappearance. This momentarily silenced the loudest critics, but it didn't find the children. It only deepened the mystery. If the parents were telling the truth, and the children really did just walk away, how could they have vanished so completely that even thermal imaging cameras and elite tracking dogs couldn't find a trace? The transition from 2025 into 2026 brought a new kind of cold to the case. The physical search had long been scaled back, though the RCMP insisted the file remained a major crime investigation. The silence from the authorities was interpreted by many as a sign that the trail had gone cold. However, the legal system was moving in the background. In early January 2026, a series of unsealed documents provided the first real glimpse into the cracks within the Sullivan-Martell household. These documents revealed that the RCMP had been investigating allegations of domestic instability for months. Malia Brooks-Murray had reportedly told officers that Martell had a temper, describing incidents where he would physically restrain her. This was the first time the public heard that the truthful stepfather from the polygraph test had a darker side. These revelations painted a picture of a home that was far from the quiet sanctuary initially described. It suggested a climate of fear and control, a detail that is often a precursor in cases where children go missing. While these documents didn't link Martell to the disappearance directly, they provided the why that many have been looking for, a reason to doubt the narrative of a peaceful morning interrupted by a tragic accident. The tension was building, and the community felt that a breaking point was near. That breaking point arrived on January 26, 2026, with the sudden and violent arrest of Daniel Martell. When the news broke that he had been charged with sexual assault, and forcible confinement, the collective gasp from the public was audible. These weren't just domestic disputes. These were serious, predatory criminal charges. The fact that the RCMP arrested him in the very same community where the children went missing added a layer of visceral intensity to the story. According to the court records, the alleged victim in this new case was an adult, but the overlap in timing is impossible to overlook. For 6 months leading up to Lilly and Jack's disappearance, Martell was allegedly engaging in the very behavior that the RCMP is now bringing to light. He appeared in Pictou Provincial Court, not as a grieving stepfather, but as a man accused of severe violence. He was released on conditions, a move that sparked outrage among those who fear he remains a danger to the community. He is ordered to stay away from his alleged victim and to keep the RCMP informed of his whereabouts at all times, with a return court date set for March 2nd, 2026. This arrest has effectively stripped away the mask of the cooperative parent. It has forced the public and the investigators to re-examine every single word he spoke in May 2025. As we stand here in late January 2026, the question is no longer just where are Lilly and Jack, but who is the man who was with them last? The shadow cast by Daniel Martell has grown long and dark, and it now looms over every piece of evidence in this case. The true weight of mystery often lies not in what is found, but in what is hidden behind closed doors. For months, the public saw Malia Brooks-Murray and Daniel Martell as two parents paralyzed by the unthinkable. They were the faces of a tragedy that had galvanized all of Nova Scotia. However, as we moved into the early weeks of 2026, the narrative of the grieving, unified household began to crumble under the weight of legal unsealings. When the RCMP's search warrants and investigative files were partially unsealed by a judge in January, the contents revealed a domestic environment that was far more volatile than the public had ever been led to believe. This wasn't just a house where children lived. It was a house where, according to Malia's own statements to police, fear was a frequent guest. The documents detailed accounts that painted Daniel Martell in a terrifying new light. Malia described him as a man with a hair-trigger temper, someone who would use his physical presence to intimidate and control. She recounted incidents where he would block her from leaving rooms, hold her down to prevent her from moving, and on at least one occasion, pushing her during a heated argument. This revelation was a massive departure from the image of the supportive partner who sat beside her during the early days of the search. It forced every investigator and every person following this case on True Crime Radar to ask a painful question. If this was a reality of their relationship, what was the reality for Lilly and Jack? The wandering away theory suddenly felt flimsy when placed against this backdrop of domestic instability. We have to look at the timeline again with this new information. On the morning of May 2nd, 2025, the story was that the children slipped out of the house at some point after 8 a.m. while the adults were sleeping. In many cases of child disappearance, wandering is a common and tragic reality, especially in rural areas. But in a home where there is alleged physical restraint and intimidation, the open door takes on a different meaning. Was it an escape, or was it a fabrication designed to explain away a disappearance that had already occurred? The unsealed documents show that the RCMP was quietly looking into these domestic issues almost from the start, despite their public stance that the case wasn't criminal. They were documenting the power dynamics and the potential for violence within that home. The fact that Martell was reportedly blocking and holding down the mother of the children suggests a level of physical dominance that is deeply concerning. When you have a 6-year-old like Lilly and a 4-year-old like Jack, they are incredibly perceptive to the energy of their environment. If there was violence or the threat of it, the household would have been a place of high stress. This makes the pink blanket found in the tree even more significant. If a child is fleeing a scary situation, they might grab a comfort object, but the location, stuck in a tree nearly a kilometer away, remains one of the most baffling physical clues in the entire case. There is also the matter of the polygraph tests, which have been used as a shield by the family for nearly a year. In Part 2, we discuss how Martell and Brooks Murray both passed these tests. But as any seasoned true crime follower knows, polygraphs are not infallible. They measure physiological responses to stress, not truth in a literal, objective sense. If a person truly believes their own narrative, or they're physiologically capable of remaining calm under pressure, they can pass. The unsealed documents suggest that while the polygraph results were a factor in the RCMP's early decision not to name suspects, they were never the get-out-of-jail-free car the public thought they were. Investigators were still digging, still watching, and still waiting. They were collecting digital evidence, interviewing neighbors who may have heard the sound of conflict, and building a profile of Daniel Martell. The contrast between the truthful man on the polygraph and the man described in the unsealed documents, a man who allegedly used his body to cage a woman, is a chasm that the RCMP has been trying to bridge for months. It leads us to wonder if the truth being told during those tests was merely a carefully constructed version of events that accounted for the children's absence without admitting to the cause. As we dive deeper into the winter of 2026, the focus of the investigation has sharpened. The RCMP has been working through a backlog of forensic evidence that is staggering in its scale. We are talking about thousands of hours of video and a massive digital footprint. In rural areas like Lansdowne Station, there aren't cameras on every corner, but there are trail cams, dashboard cameras from passing logging trucks, and the digital pings of cell phones. The unsealed documents hint that the police were meticulously tracking the movements of everyone in that house on the morning of May 2nd. They were looking for any deviation from the "we were sleeping" story. If a car moved, if a phone pinged a distant tower, if a neighbor saw a light on when it should have been dark, all of these details were being gathered. The pressure on the family was mounting, and while the public saw silence, the RCMP was actually narrowing the circle. The revelation of Martell's alleged abuse toward Malia was the first crack in the dam. It provided a motive for secrecy and a pattern of behavior that would soon culminate in a dramatic arrest that would change the trajectory of the Sullivan case forever. The morning of January 26, 2026, was cold and clear in Pictou County, but the atmosphere in the town of Lansdowne was anything but calm. Shortly before noon, the RCMP moved in. This wasn't a search party or a routine check-in. This was a tactical arrest. Daniel Robert Martell, the man who had spent months under the microscope of public suspicion, was taken into custody, but the charges were not what many had expected. He wasn't being charged with the abduction or harm of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Instead, he was being charged with sexual assault, and forcible confinement involving an adult complainant. For a moment, there was a sense of confusion. Was this a distraction? A separate issue? But as the details of the arrest filtered out, the connection became chillingly clear. The RCMP revealed that the alleged crimes took place between September 1st, 2024 and March 30th, 2025. This timeline is the smoking gun of character. These alleged violent acts occurred in the 7 months immediately preceding the disappearance of the children. If the allegations are true, Daniel Martell was living a double life. A man allegedly capable of sexual violence and domestic imprisonment, while simultaneously playing a role of father figure to 2 small, vulnerable children. The nature of these charges, sexual assault and forcible confinement, speaks to a specific kind of predator. These are crimes of control, crimes of dominance, and crimes that involve the stripping away of a victim's autonomy. To hear that Martell is accused of these things during the very period he was living with Lilly and Jack is enough to make anyone's blood run cold. The RCMP has been very careful to state that these charges are unrelated to the missing children file. But in the world of criminal profiling, there is rarely such a thing as a completely unrelated violent history. The forcible confinement charge is particularly striking, given Malia's earlier statements about him, blocking her and holding her down. It suggests a pattern of behavior that escalated from domestic disputes into serious, indictable offenses. When we look at the house in Lansdowne Station now, we don't just see a place of tragedy. We see a potential crime scene that may have been a prison for more than one person. The adult complainant in this new case has not been named, but their bravery in coming forward has provided the RCMP with the legal leverage they needed to put Martell behind bars, even if only temporarily. The reaction from the community has been one of pure, unadulterated fury. For nearly a year, the people of New Glasgow and Pictou County have been told to be patient, to trust the process, and to avoid internet rumors. But the arrest of Martell on such violent charges feels like a betrayal of that trust. How could a man with these allegations hanging over his head be allowed to remain in the community where 2 children vanished? When Martell appeared in Pictou Provincial Court following his arrest, the tension was palpable. He wasn't the broken man seen in earlier media clips. He was a defendant facing life-altering charges. And yet, to the shock of many, he was released on conditions. The court decided that he could return to the community, provided he followed a strict set of rules. No contact with the victim, no firearms, and a requirement to notify the RCMP of any change in his living situation. This release has sparked protests and a renewed sense of urgency. People feel that the clock is ticking, and with Martell back on the streets, even under supervision, the safety of the community feels compromised. While Martell prepares for his March 2nd, 2026 court date, the RCMP is continuing to hammer away at the missing persons file. Staff Sergeant Rob McCommon has gone on record stating that the large volume of evidence is finally starting to form a coherent picture. They have processed over 8,000 video files, and they are using advanced forensic software to analyze every frame. They are looking for the children, yes, but they are also looking for Martell. They are looking for his truck, his silhouette, and his shadow. The arrest for the unrelated assault has given investigators a new perspective on their primary person of interest. It allows them to re-interview witnesses with a new set of facts. It allows them to go back to the biological father, Cody Sullivan, who has been living a year-long nightmare, and ask him about the things he might have seen or heard during his custody exchanges. The arrest of Daniel Martell may not be the end of the Lilly and Jack Sullivan story, but it is undoubtedly the beginning of the end for the secrets that have kept this case cold. The pressure is higher than it has ever been, and as we look toward the spring, the hope is that the truth will finally emerge in the woods of Lansdowne Station. If you want to stay updated on the legal proceedings of Daniel Martell and any potential breakthroughs in the search for Lilly and Jack, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We will be following this case every step of the way as the March court date approaches. This is True Crime Radar. Keep your eyes open, because the truth is always closer than it seems. To understand the sheer magnitude of the investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, you have to look beyond the trees and into the digital ether. While the physical search in the woods of Pictou County involved boots on the ground and dogs and brush, the real battle for the truth has been happening in high-tech forensic labs. The RCMP has confirmed that their major crime unit is currently sifting through a staggering 8,000 video files. Let that number sink in for a moment. This isn't just a few hours of security footage from a local gas station. It is a massive fragmented digital puzzle that covers every possible angle of the Lansdowne station area and beyond. Investigators have been pulling data from motion-activated trail cameras meant for hunters, dashboard cameras from logging trucks that traverse those remote backroads, and doorbell cameras from houses kilometers away. They're looking for a ghost, a car that shouldn't be there, a silhouette in the background or frame, or a light flickering in the distance an hour that doesn't make sense. Staff Sergeant Rob McCommon, the man leading the Major Crime and Behavioral Sciences Division, has noted that this volume of information is helping to form a picture of what took place on the morning of May 2nd, 2025. But a picture made of 8,000 pieces takes an agonizingly long time to assemble. Each file must be time-stamped, cross-referenced with cell tower data, and compared against the official timeline provided by the family. In this digital deep dive, the RCMP is searching for a contradiction. The official story has always been that the children wandered off while their mother, Malia Brooks-Murray, and their stepfather, Daniel Martell, were dozing in bed. But the forensic analysis isn't just about the morning of the disappearance. It's about the days and weeks leading up to it. The 8,000 files represent a digital surveillance of a lifestyle. Was there a visitor the family didn't mention? Was a vehicle seen leaving the property in the middle of the night? The unsealed court documents from January 2026 suggest that the police were looking for something specific, evidence of the blocking and holding down that Malia eventually described in her police interviews. If Martell was as physically dominant and controlling as the allegations suggest, it's possible that the digital trail holds evidence of that control. We're talking about GPS data from vehicles, the metadata of deleted photos, and the patterns of phone usage that can reveal a household in crisis long before a 911 call is ever made. This is the silent work of a modern investigation, the kind of work that doesn't make for dramatic headlines but eventually provides a forensic certainty the RCMP says they are focused on. Yet, as the forensics team works through the data, the psychological profile of the case continues to baffle experts. The fact that Daniel Martell, Malia Brooks-Murray, and even the biological father, Lilly Sullivan, all passed polygraph tests remains a central, frustrating pillar of the mystery. How could a man who is now facing charges of sexual assault and forcible confinement, crimes of extreme manipulation, pass a lie detector test about the disappearance of his stepchildren? Behavioral science suggests that some individuals, particularly those with a high degree of confidence or those who have successfully rationalized their actions, can navigate a polygraph with chilling ease. Martell has been very vocal in the media, often speaking in the third person, portraying himself as a figurehead for the investigation and a victim of public judgment. He has claimed he is completely honest and open, yet the recent charges suggest a man with a hidden violent reality. The RCMP's Behavioral Sciences Unit is likely looking at this disconnect. The difference between the man who holds up photos of the children for the cameras and the man accused of confining an adult victim against her will. The complexity of the Sullivan case is further deepened by the sheer number of tips that continue to pour in. Over 1,066 leads have been followed, ranging from sightings of children in distant provinces to dark theories about underground tunnels. But the RCMP is bringing it all back to forensics. They're looking at the pink blanket found in the tree and the child-sized boot print with renewed scrutiny. If the 8,000 video files show no sign of the children wandering toward that tree, then the physical evidence itself becomes a digital marker of something else entirely, perhaps a stage scene. Every interview conducted, 75 in total, is being reevaluated in light of Martell's arrest. If he was capable of the violence alleged in the January 2026 charges, every word he spoke to investigators in May 2025 is now under a microscope. The digital ghost trail is more than just footage. It is a heartbeat of a household that stopped beating the moment those children vanished, and the RCMP is determined to make that heart speak through the data. As we look toward the horizon of 2026, the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is marching toward a decisive moment. The arrest of Daniel Martell on January 26 has fundamentally changed the public's perception of this tragedy, but the legal battle is just beginning. Martell is scheduled to appear in Pictou Provincial Court on March 2nd, 2026, and while those charges are officially unrelated to the disappearance, they have cast a shadow that no amount of distance can erase. The upcoming trial for sexual assault, and forcible confinement will be a test of the evidence the RCMP has gathered over the last 8 months. It's important to remember that these charges involve an adult complainant, and the legal system must treat them with their own weight and gravity. However, for people in Nova Scotia, this court date is inextricably linked to the missing children. The community is waiting to see if more unsealed documents will be released, or if the prosecution will reveal new evidence that bridges the gap between Martell's alleged private violence and the public disappearance of 2 innocent children. The March trial represents the first real moment of accountability in a year defined by questions and silence. But what about the children? Nearly 9 months have passed since Lilly and Jack were last seen in that Dollarama in New Glasgow. The biological father, Lilly Sullivan, has been a figure of quiet, devastating grief throughout this process. Though he hadn't seen the children in 3 years prior to their disappearance, a fact the RCMP highlighted early on, he has been fully cooperative, even past his own polygraph test to prove he had no hand in their vanishing. For a father to be on the outside looking in, watching the man who replaced him in the household be arrested for violent crimes, must be a unique kind of hell. The theories surrounding the children's fate remain divided. There are those who still hold out hope for a miracle, that the children were taken and are being cared for elsewhere. But as the months turn into nearly a year, and with the introduction of cadaver dogs into the search areas as recently as October 2025, the RCMP is clearly preparing for a grim reality. Staff Sergeant McCommon has stated he is confident the case will be resolved, a choice of words that suggests the police know more than they are letting on. The theory of wandering away is increasingly being pushed to the margins of the investigation. The geographic reality of Lansdowne Station, combined with the forensic silence of the 8,000 video files, makes it harder and harder to believe that 2 small children could simply disappear into the woods without being caught on a single trail cam or seen by a single neighbor. The focus has shifted to the domestic environment, to the ups and downs that Martell admitted to, and the physical abuse that Malia eventually detailed. The arrest of Martell for forcible confinement suggests a man who knew how to keep people where he wanted them. It suggests a man who understood how to control a narrative through intimidation. If that same control was applied to Lilly and Jack, the woods may have been nothing more than a convenient backdrop for a much more localized tragedy. The RCMP's focus on forensic evidence likely means they're looking for DNA, for microscopic traces of struggle, or for the one digital ping that proves the children never left property alive. As we conclude this deep dive on True Crime Radar, we are left with community in waiting. The yellow ribbons in Pictou County are faded now, but the resolve to find Lilly and Jack has only grown stronger. The arrest of Daniel Martell has provided a target for the public's frustration, but it has not yet provided a location of the children. We have a mother who has remained largely silent, a biological father who is searching for answers, and a stepfather who is now facing the full weight of the law for violent crimes. The March 2nd court date will be a turning point, not just for Martell, but for the legacy of this investigation. We will be there, tracking every update, every unsealed document, and every statement from the RCMP. Because in the end, this isn't just about the arrest of one man. It's about the 2 small faces that haven't been seen in 9 months. It's about Lilly and Jack, and the truth that is buried somewhere in the quiet hills of Nova Scotia. If you want to stay updated on the legal proceedings of Daniel Martell and any potential breakthroughs in the search for Lilly and Jack, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We will be following this case every step of the way as the March court date approaches. This is True Crime Radar. Keep your eyes open, because the truth is always closer than it seems.